The Isle of Wight had a quiet kind of charm that didn't shout for attention, but drew it in slowly, like the tide inching across the Solent. For most travelers, it was a peaceful coastal corner of Britain, but for Victoria and Albert, it became something far more profound, a landscape that stirred memories, emotions, and a longing for a life beyond the rigid corridors of court. Victoria had known the island since childhood, when her mother brought her to Norris Castle, the neighboring estate whose sweeping views over the water made a lasting imprint on her imagination. Those early days stayed with her, tucked somewhere deep, becoming the kind of memory a person returns to instinctively when they seek warmth and familiarity in adulthood. Years later, burdened by the ever-present duties of monarchy and longing for a refuge where her growing family could breathe freely, Victoria followed that instinct back to the island. Albert, too, felt an immediate resonance with the landscape. The view across the Solent reminded him of the Bay of Naples, a place tied to his own sense of beauty and culture. In that shimmering resemblance, he saw not only aesthetic pleasure, but the spark of a possibility, the idea that they could build something entirely their own, a home shaped not by tradition or court architects, but by their shared vision of serenity. When they first walked the grounds of the modest Georgian house called Osborne, the building itself was ordinary to the point of disappointment. Narrow corridors, cramped rooms, and a structure clearly too small for a royal household made it unsuitable as a permanent retreat. Yet its limitations only strengthened their determination. The land around the house was what mattered, the elevated views, the gentle slopes leading toward the private curve of Osborne Bay, the sheltered woods that created an invisible boundary between the world and the life they wished to protect. It wasn't the house they were buying. It was the freedom the landscape promised. Their early conversations about Osborne were less about what stood there and more about what could stand there. They imagined a place where the strict choreography of palace life could loosen, where their children could play outdoors without ceremony, and where they themselves could step out as a family rather than as symbols. The island's isolation from London's demands created the perfect emotional distance, while its proximity to the coast offered a sense of openness that neither Windsor nor Buckingham Palace could ever provide. The decision to purchase the property in 1845 felt almost inevitable once the idea had taken root. Victoria spoke of the calm she felt during each visit, a calm she couldn't find in Windsor's vast stone walls or in the ceremonial stateliness of London. Albert saw the island as a blank canvas, one that would allow him to express his architectural interests without the interference of committees or protocols. Osborne was a rare chance for them to shape a home that reflected their personalities instead of their roles. And so, the modest house became the seed of a far more ambitious dream. It wasn't torn down immediately. It lingered for a brief period like a placeholder, a quiet witness to the moment a royal couple decided to reinvent what a royal residence could be. Their attachment to the land was emotional, almost personal, and as soon as the purchase was complete, the transformation began in their minds long before the first stone of the new building was ever set. Osborne would become a sanctuary, a retreat, and eventually a symbol, not of power, but of the life they wished they could lead every day. From that quiet island hill overlooking the Solent, the dream took its first breath. The first weeks after the purchase revealed a truth Victoria and Albert had sensed from the beginning, but hoped to challenge, that the original Osborne House, despite its charm, simply could not become the refuge they envisioned. The Georgian building, with its modest proportions and aging bones, had the gentle elegance of a country home, but none of the flexibility required for a royal household that traveled with staff, schedules, and the unavoidable machinery of monarchy. What they had wanted was a retreat. What they walked into felt more like a temporary stopgap, a place that might hold a family for a summer, but never for a life. Rooms intended for simple domestic living now had to accommodate not just their growing family, but advisors, attendants, and the rhythm of an institution that never fully paused. Victoria, accustomed to the vast halls of Windsor, found the cramped corridors confining rather than intimate. The ceilings felt low, the windows too narrow to let in the light she cherished on the island. Albert, always methodical, tried at first to think practically. Could a wing be added, a wall removed, a floor reworked? But the more he examined the structure, the more obvious it became that any alteration would only highlight how fundamentally limited the house was. the first true disappointment struck when they attempted to host even a small circle of visitors. Parlor spaces meant for quiet domestic gatherings became crowded, and the dining room, though respectable for a private family, lacked the grandeur expected of a royal residence. Even an informal one, it wasn't extravagance they sought, but dignity, and the old house simply couldn't provide it. The uncomfortable reality was that their retreat had to serve dual purposes. It needed to feel like a home, yet still reflect the status and responsibilities they carried with them wherever they went. Even their children's routines revealed the building's limitations. The nurseries were tucked into spaces never meant for more than occasional use. The ventilation was poor, and the layout forced the family to move through awkward transitions between rooms that didn't connect with any logic. The house wasn't dangerous or unsuitable. It was simply too small in spirit for what their life demanded. Every attempt to imagine a future here led to the same conclusion. The structure could not grow with them. It was Albert who finally voiced what both had been thinking. Standing with Victoria near a window that overlooked the water, he spoke plainly about the building's constraints and the impossibility of transforming it into the sanctuary they wanted. Victoria agreed without hesitation. She had hoped the house would adapt to them, but now saw that they were the ones adapting to its limits, and that was not the life she wanted for her family. The decision formed between them naturally, without drama or resistance. The old Osborne had to be replaced entirely. Once the idea settled in, Albert began sketching possibilities almost immediately. The disappointment of the small house transformed into the excitement of creation. Rather than stretching the existing structure past what it could bear, they would build anew, a residence shaped from the ground up, according to their vision, their tastes, and their desire for a private world of their own. The modest house that had once stood as their gateway to the island became instead a reminder of why they needed to start fresh. What lingered from that period wasn't regret, but clarity. They hadn't been wrong to choose Osborne. They had simply outgrown the building that stood there. And as soon as they acknowledged that truth, the path forward opened, one that would lead to the design of a home unlike any other in royal history, born not from tradition, but from the personal dreams of two people seeking a place to live, not rule. Albert approached the challenge of rebuilding Osborne not as a patron commissioning a grand project, but as a creator, stepping into a world where he finally had full freedom. For years, he had lived within the constraints of official architects, committees, and traditions that dictated every decision at royal residences. At Osborne, for the first time, he stood before a blank page, an opportunity to design a home that reflected not political authority, but personal harmony. And he seized that opportunity with a seriousness and passion that surprised even those closest to him. His vision took root in memories of southern Europe, especially the sunlit silhouettes of Italian Renaissance villas he admired during his travels. The calm symmetry, wide terraces, and open loggias of Mediterranean estates had always spoken to him more deeply than the heavy ornamentation typical of northern palaces. Their balance, order, and clarity matched his own disciplined personality, and the unobstructed connection between architecture and landscape offered a sense of inner peace he longed to bring into his family's daily life. The Isle of Wight, with its soft climate and sweeping views over the Solent, felt like the perfect canvas on which to transplant a piece of that world. He studied sketches of villas near the Bay of Naples and compared them to the contours of Osborne's hilltop. The resemblance of the Solent to the Neapolitan coastline, something he had noticed on his first visit, became the emotional anchor for his plan. He imagined a house that welcomed light at every hour of the day, a residence where the structure would seem to breathe with the landscape rather than sit stiffly upon it. His earliest drawings showed clean lines, generous windows, and commanding towers that would rise above the estate like watchful guardians. Osborne would not be a palace in the traditional sense. It would be a Mediterranean retreat transplanted into British soil. Albert worked not only as a designer, but as a theorist. He considered how each room should feel, who would use it, what view each window should frame, and how the gardens would extend the architecture outward. He believed that a home should reflect the character of the people who lived in it, and at Osborne he sought to create a physical expression of the life he and Victoria wanted, a place defined not by ceremony, but by family. The layout became an intricate balance of form and function, where beauty served comfort and comfort served emotional well-being. While many royals would have limited themselves to approving plans, Albert immersed himself in the technical process. He studied elevations, corrected proportions, and requested adjustments with precision that astonished the builders. His vision was not abstract. He understood structure, weight, materials, and the practical demands of daily use. Each architectural choice carried meaning. The symmetrically arranged façade reflected the stability he wished to bring to the monarchy. The wide terraces created spaces where the family could sit outdoors without interruption from public life. The Belvedere towers, soaring high above the estate, were more than decorative. They symbolized watchfulness, aspiration, and a vantage point from which the world seemed calmer. What made his vision remarkable was not just its ambition, but its intimacy. Osborne was designed to be an escape from Buckingham Palace's formality, a response to the unspoken pressures of royal life. Albert envisioned a home where Victoria could feel free from the weight of expectation, where their children could run without constraint, and where he himself could study, reflect, and build with his own hands and mind. The Renaissance style, with its simplicity and clarity, embodied that aspiration. It represented order without rigidity, beauty without excess, elegance without intimidation. Slowly, as his sketches became architectural drawings and the drawings became the foundation of a new residence, Osborne transformed from a remote island retreat into a deeply personal dream. It was no longer merely a building project. It became the physical manifestation of Albert's yearning for a private world untouched by court politics, a sanctuary shaped by intellect, memory, and affection. His role at Osborne marked one of the few times in his life when he could express himself not through duty, but through creation. And with every line of his plan, he brought that dream closer to reality. Albert's vision for Osborne might have remained a beautifully crafted dream on paper. If not for the moment, he crossed paths with the one man capable of turning that dream into stone, timber, and light. Thomas Cubitt was already legendary in the world of British building, an architect-engineer whose projects reshaped parts of London and set new standards for precision and craftsmanship. Yet what bound him to Osborne was not fame, but compatibility. Albert worked like a scholar, with meticulous attention to proportion and theory. Cubitt worked like a master craftsman who carried an entire city's worth of practical knowledge in his hands. Together, they formed a partnership that felt less like contractor and client and more like two minds meeting in the middle of a shared ambition. Albert had watched Cubitt's previous work with growing admiration, especially the transformation of Buckingham Palace's façade. He saw in Cubitt a type of genius rarely given the recognition it deserved, a man who understood not only how to build, but how to solve problems before they arose. When it came time to choose the person who could bring Osborne's Italian Renaissance vision to life on a windy island hillside, Albert didn't hesitate. Cubitt possessed the combination of structural discipline and creative flexibility that the project demanded. Their collaboration began with long discussions rather than immediate construction. Albert laid out his conceptual sketches, explaining not only what he wanted the building to look like, but what he wanted it to feel like. He spoke of the light he had seen in Naples, the serenity of Mediterranean terraces, the harmony between architecture and landscape that had inspired him since youth. Cubitt listened not as a subordinate, but as an equal, absorbing the emotional weight behind the designs. He understood that Osborne was not meant to mimic a palace. It was meant to be a home where royalty could experience ordinary joys without losing their dignity. What surprised Albert most was how effortlessly Cubitt translated vision into reality. Where Albert imagined symmetry, Cubitt produced structural solutions that made the symmetry possible. Where Albert wanted open loggias and sweeping balconies, Cubitt refined the engineering so they would stand firm in the island winds. He suggested materials, adjusted proportions, and sometimes offered subtle alternatives that improved the design without compromising the dream. Albert, who had often felt dismissed or patronized in official architectural matters, finally found someone who respected his intellect and welcomed his involvement. Victoria noticed the transformation immediately. She saw how animated Albert became when discussing the details of Osborne with Cubitt, how their conversations brought a spark of purpose into her husband's usually restrained demeanor. She admired Cubitt not only for his skill, but for his character, his steadiness, his patience, and the genuine warmth with which he interacted with their family. It didn't take long before she began referring to him affectionately as our Cubit, a nickname that spoke volumes about the trust and affection he earned within the household. Under their combined guidance, Osborne's design grew into something extraordinary, a residence that balanced grandeur with gentleness, formality with comfort. The towers rose like elegant sentinels, echoing the Renaissance aesthetic Albert loved, while the interior layout was structured around family life rather than ceremony. Instead of intimidating spaces designed for public display, rooms were shaped to invite light, conversation, and relaxation. Even the placement of windows reflected deliberate choices about the views the family would see each morning and evening. Cubit's workmanship ensured that Osborne would stand not as a fragile illusion of Mediterranean charm, but as a robust, carefully engineered home capable of weathering both time and climate. Yet he never lost sight of the emotional purpose behind the project. He built with precision, but also with understanding, aware that he was constructing not just a royal residence, but a sanctuary. As the walls rose and the towers took shape, Albert often walked the grounds with Cubit, studying their progress with quiet satisfaction. For once, he felt his ideas were not being compromised or reshaped by bureaucratic expectations. Cubit's respect allowed him to participate fully, turning the project into a true collaboration rather than a ceremonial gesture of oversight. Through this partnership, Osborne became more than architecture. It became a reflection of two minds working in harmony, guided by a shared belief in order, beauty, and purpose. And as the structure neared completion, Victoria recognized that without Cubit, Albert's dream would never have been realized with such grace. The house that emerged from their union was not simply built. It was crafted thoughtfully and lovingly by a prince with a vision and the builder who understood how to give that vision life. The transformation of Osborne from a modest country house into a radiant Mediterranean-inspired residence began with the rise of its main façade, a process that turned the estate into a living sculpture of Albert's imagination. Construction unfolded with a rhythm that reflected both the precision of Cubit's craftsmanship and the emotional investment of the prince, who watched every stage with the focus of an artist overseeing the creation of his masterpiece. What had once been a simple structure gradually gave way to walls that soared higher than anything previously built on the island, their pale stone glowing softly under the English sun as if already touched by a southern light. The façade did not emerge all at once. It grew section by section, each part revealing another layer of Albert's vision. Workers laid foundation stones with unprecedented care, understanding that the house needed not only beauty, but permanence against the coastal winds. From those foundations rose symmetrical lines that Albert had designed with mathematical precision. He believed symmetry created a sense of calm, a quiet order that reflected the inner world he hoped Osborne would offer his family. As each column, arch, and balcony took shape, it became clear that the building was intended not to impose authority, but to invite ease, light, and peaceful living. Yet the true signature of the design appeared when construction of the Belvedere Towers began. These were not merely decorative additions meant to elevate the house. They were the architectural heartbeat of Albert's concept. Rising above the estate like elegant watchtowers, the Belvederes symbolized everything the prince sought in Osborne: perspective, aspiration, and openness. Their very name, derived from the Italian for beautiful view, captured the essence of why the house existed. From their upper levels, one could see the Solent stretching toward the horizon, the gardens unfolding below, and the entire landscape that had inspired the project in the first place. Building the towers required engineering skill far beyond that of typical country estates. The winds near the coast were unpredictable, and the towers needed strength without losing the slender grace Albert envisioned. Cubit's team developed reinforced foundations and carefully calculated proportions so that the towers would remain both elegant and stable. As scaffolding wrapped around their growing forms, Victoria often watched from the gardens, marveling at how quickly they reshaped the skyline of the estate. It was the first time she realized that Osborne would not just be a retreat, it would be a statement. The façade and towers together created a visual harmony that challenged the expectations of what a royal residence could be. There were no heavy battlements or Gothic ornamentation that declared power through mass. Instead, Osborne looked outward toward the sea, with terraces that opened to the landscape and windows that spilled sunlight into rooms designed for family life rather than formality. Albert wanted the house to convey dignity without intimidation, beauty without ostentation, and the towers embodied that philosophy perfectly. They stood not as symbols of authority, but as beacons of clarity and peace, architectural expressions of a private world carved out of public duty. As the final sections of the façade were completed, something remarkable began to happen. The house no longer looked like a construction project. It looked like a villa transported from the Italian coast and gently placed on the Isle of Wight. Its pale exterior stood in striking contrast to the deep greens of the surrounding trees, making it appear almost luminous, as if catching and holding the light in a way other buildings never could. Visitors who approached by carriage along the winding paths saw the towers rise first, then the broad face of the house revealing itself gradually, creating a sense of anticipation that Albert had designed deliberately. The façade was more than architecture. It was Albert's personal declaration of what a royal home could be. It bridged continents and styles, merged practicality with romance, and set a tone for the entire estate. The Belvedere Towers in particular became the unmistakable symbols of Osborne, instantly recognizable and unlike anything else in the royal architectural tradition. They turned the residence into a landmark of innovation, proof that personal vision could coexist with royal heritage without diminishing either. By the time the last stone was set in place, Osborne House had ceased to be merely a retreat from court. It had become a testament to creativity, craftsmanship, and emotional purpose, a home built not to impress governments or dignitaries, but to shelter a family seeking a place where life could unfold freely. Albert's architectural manifesto now stood complete on the hill, rising above the Solent with quiet confidence, ready to become the heart of a new chapter in the royal family's story. Inside the newly completed Osborne House, the first rooms to reveal the soul of the residence were the grand chambers on the ground floor, spaces that blended the elegance expected of royalty with the warmer, more intimate spirit Albert and Victoria wanted their retreat to embody. These rooms formed the ceremonial heart of the home, not because they hosted constant official events, but because they captured the values, connections, and quiet aspirations that defined the royal couple's life at Osborne. Every surface, every pattern, every imported piece seemed to speak in its own way, carrying stories from across Europe into the gentle light of the Isle of Wight. The drawing room was the clearest expression of Victoria's love for refinement and Albert's devotion to artistic discipline. It was designed not as a hall of opulence, but as a sanctuary of cultivated beauty, where guests and family alike could feel enveloped rather than overwhelmed. Its ceilings bloomed with intricate plasterwork that softened the room's geometry, creating an atmosphere where grandeur blended harmoniously with comfort. Ornate moldings framed delicate frescoes, and the draperies, heavy but not imposing, fell in rich cascades of fabric, chosen to echo the gentle tones of the sea beyond the windows. The drawing room's palette, radiant yet composed, set the tone for the entire house. Nothing was meant to shout. Everything was meant to glow. This room also served as a gallery of relationships, diplomacy, and personal sentiment. Gifts from European monarchs rested on tables or stood proudly in alcoves, placed not as trophies, but as reminders of a continent interconnected through bloodlines, alliances, and quiet exchanges of goodwill. Among the most striking gifts were those from Russia, whose imperial family maintained close ties with Victoria. A massive porcelain vase, once displayed in the Green Drawing Room at Windsor, had been sent by Tsar Nicholas I, symbolizing the mutual respect between the two courts. The vase's deep luminous glaze and elaborate imagery reflected a craftsmanship far different from British styles, making it one of the first things visitors noticed upon entering. Though it would later return to Windsor, for years it stood as a centerpiece in Osborne's billiard room, a silent ambassador from the East. The dining room, equally magnificent, carried its own distinct spirit. It was built for far more than meals. It was a setting for storytelling, shared moments, and the rituals of family life. The enormous dining table, polished to a near mirror-like sheen, stretched beneath a chandelier whose crystals broke the light into a dance of soft sparks across the walls. Intricately carved wooden chairs, each crafted with a level of detail that rewarded a closer look, lined the table, their patterns inspired by both Victorian and continental designs. The walls were adorned with tapestries that spoke of history, mythology, and travel, turning the room into a conversation between past and present. Even in its formality, the dining room held warmth. It was a place where meals became memories and celebrations unfolded with a sense of quiet joy rather than rigid protocol. Yet it was the billiard room that perhaps best captured the fusion of royal life and private leisure. Victoria and Albert used this room frequently, and its decor reflected both utility and prestige. The green baize of the billiard table invited activity, but around it stood pieces that carried deeper cultural weight. The mosaic table gifted by the Russian Tsar remained here, its surface a kaleidoscope of tiny stone fragments meticulously arranged to depict scenes and symbols tied to Russian artistry. Nearby stood metalwork and porcelain that represented decades of diplomatic exchange. These objects never felt like museum pieces. They were woven into the rhythm of everyday life, reminders that even in a secluded retreat, the world beyond Osborne's gardens continued to turn. What made these rooms remarkable wasn't their opulence, but their intention. Albert ensured that each space communicated a subtle message through design, symmetry for calm, color for warmth, and ornamentation for emotional texture. Victoria contributed her sensibilities as well, her love of sentimental objects, her appreciation for craftsmanship, her desire to create spaces where she could feel truly at ease. Together, they curated interiors that served as both artistic expressions and living environments. As visitors crossed from room to room, they experienced more than a sequence of Victorian chambers. They moved through a narrative of family identity. The drawing room spoke of artistry and diplomacy. The dining room embodied celebration and continuity. The billiard room blended leisure with the weight of history. Nothing felt accidental. Every detail, every imported rug, every carefully placed vase whispered a part of the story Victoria and Albert were building for themselves. A story of culture, connection, and the quiet grandeur of a home shaped by love rather than protocol. These rooms became the heart of Osborne, not because they were the grandest, but because they held the lives lived within them. And as the house continued to expand, the spirit that began here would ripple outward into every corridor, terrace, and garden, defining Osborne's identity for generations to come. The transition from Osborne's formal ground floor chambers to the family's private quarters felt almost like stepping into an entirely different world. The moment one crossed into the first floor, the tone of the house shifted from ceremonial elegance to gentle domesticity. Here, far from the symmetry and regal refinement of the drawing room and dining room, Victoria and Albert allowed themselves a freedom they rarely enjoyed anywhere else. The freedom to live simply, quietly, and without the invisible weight of the crown. The contrast was immediate. Instead of cavernous ceilings and shimmering chandeliers, the private apartments offered soft colors, restrained ornamentation, and a noticeably warmer atmosphere. These rooms were never meant to impress visitors. They were meant to soothe the people who lived in them. Albert had been determined from the start that Osborne would not become another palace in disguise. He wanted their private life to feel genuine, unforced, and grounded, and the design of the upper floor embodied that philosophy with remarkable clarity. Victoria's bedroom was the clearest expression of this gentle domesticity. Everything in it seemed chosen for comfort rather than spectacle. Softly colored walls created a calm, almost tender ambiance, and the furnishings, though still finely made, avoided the heavy grandeur favored in official residences. Delicate fabrics, light wood tones, and thoughtful details gave the room a feeling of safety and intimacy. Here she wrote letters, rested between engagements, and spent hours with her children, who were encouraged to visit her freely. The space reflected her personality, sentimental, affectionate, and quietly attached to the rituals of family life. Just steps away, Albert's study revealed the striking differences between the two temperaments. While Victoria's room felt airy and gentle, his study embraced darker woods, tidy arrangements, and the disciplined atmosphere of a man who found clarity and order. Books lined the shelves in precise patterns, and the desk, always meticulously organized, served as the command center of his intellectual pursuits. It was here that he read, designed, planned, and contemplated the ideas that shaped not only Osborne, but many aspects of their family's life. The room radiated focus and introspection, echoing his meticulous character and his need for thoughtful solitude. Yet, despite their contrasts, the two rooms complemented each other the way the couple themselves did. Victoria's softness balanced Albert's structure, and his precision steadied her emotive nature. Nowhere else in the house was that harmony more evident than in the layout of their private apartments. Their spaces were close enough to remain connected, yet different enough to preserve individuality, an architectural reflection of a marriage built on both companionship and respect. The children's presence shaped these rooms in ways that were unusual for royal households of the era. In many aristocratic homes, children were kept apart in distant nurseries, taught to appear only when duty demanded it. At Osborne, Albert and Victoria did the opposite. They insisted that their children feel welcome in the private apartments at any time. Small toys, books, and personal mementos were scattered through the sitting rooms, subtle reminders that the future heirs of the monarchy were raised not in gilded isolation, but in the warmth of a real family dynamic. Laughter, footsteps, hurried conversations, and the endless curiosity of childhood filled these rooms with a liveliness rarely seen in royal environments. Even the furniture reflected this informality. Chairs were comfortable rather than ceremonial. Tables bore signs of frequent use. The family sitting room, where they gathered in the evenings, was arranged for closeness rather than display, with sofas positioned around a central point to encourage conversation. Portraits and sketches of the children hung on the walls, not staged court paintings, but intimate works capturing everyday moments. It was a room built for life, not tradition. Every detail of the private apartments reinforced the idea that Osborne was more than a residence. It was a home shaped around the rhythms of a family that longed for normalcy. The absence of excessive ornamentation was not a lack of luxury, but a deliberate expression of values. The royal couple had enough grandeur at Buckingham Palace and Windsor. What they needed on the island was authenticity, warmth, and the precious illusion of an ordinary life. Walking through these rooms felt like reading a quiet story written in architecture, a story of two people who, despite their positions, yearned for simplicity. The private apartments revealed their truest selves more clearly than any official portrait ever could. Victoria's emotional depth, Albert's disciplined mind, their shared devotion to their children, and their desire to escape the relentless gaze of royalty, all of it lived within these walls. Here, the crown was not abandoned, but it was gently set aside. And in that space of calm, the family found the kind of peace that no palace could ever provide. Among all the choices Victoria and Albert made at Osborne, none surprised their contemporaries more than the way they allowed their children to inhabit the house. In an age when aristocratic families routinely kept their sons and daughters tucked away in remote nurseries, visited only at prescribed hours and raised mostly by nannies, the royal couple broke with tradition in a way that transformed the entire atmosphere of their home. At Osborne, children were not sidelined. They were present everywhere, shaping the rhythm of daily life and leaving their imprint on the very architecture of the residence. The belief that their children should grow up in a natural, affectionate environment guided many of the design decisions Albert made for the upper floors. Instead of isolating the nursery in a distant wing, he placed it close to the private apartments, ensuring that the little ones could wander into their parents' rooms whenever they wished. Doors connected spaces in ways that encouraged movement rather than restricting it, and hallways were kept wide and unobstructed so that small footsteps could race freely from one room to another. This was unheard of in royal circles, where the rigid separation between adult and child spaces was considered an essential part of upbringing. The result was a kind of domestic warmth that softened the entire house. The private corridors, once imagined as serene and quiet retreats for Victoria and Albert, soon became spaces filled with the laughter and energy of young children. Small objects, wooden toys, drop spindles, books, half-finished drawings, found their way onto tables, and the gentle disorder of family life became part of the house's charm. Victoria cherished these moments. She wrote often about how the presence of her children lifted her spirits, especially during the most demanding periods of her reign, and she welcomed the way Osborne allowed them to share in her daily life. Albert viewed their involvement with equal enthusiasm, but from a different perspective. He believed that closeness to their parents would teach the children responsibility, empathy, and the value of genuine affection. To him, the house was not merely a shelter, but a carefully structured environment meant to shape character. When he designed rooms, he imagined how children would interact with them, where they would sit, where they would read, where they might stand to watch the view from the window. Even the location of certain staircases was deliberate, arranged so the children could move safely between floors without interfering with the more formal areas of the home. The layout reinforced this philosophy. The children's rooms opened into shared spaces that encouraged gathering rather than isolation. Their proximity to Victoria's and Albert's apartments created a natural flow in which family members crossed paths constantly throughout the day. Breakfasts in the sitting room, unplanned visits to Albert's study, and quiet moments at Victoria's bedside were all part of the household rhythm. Servants quickly adapted to the unusual dynamic, learning to step aside gracefully as young princes and princesses darted through hallways normally reserved for dignified footmen. This closeness also created a new sense of transparency within the home. The children witnessed their parents in ordinary moments, reading by the window, discussing plans at Albert's desk, or simply resting in the quiet hours of the afternoon. These intimate observations deepened the bonds within the family and provided the royal children with a rare privilege, the experience of parental presence in its most genuine form. Osborne taught them that their parents were not distant figures of ceremony, but real people with emotions, routines, and private lives. The house itself responded to this new life. Rooms that had begun as architectural concepts evolved into living environments shaped by small hands and restless curiosity. Cushions were rearranged, decorative items were occasionally misplaced, and blankets were dragged from one room to another as children invented new games or sought comfort near their parents. Yet, rather than resisting these changes, Victoria and Albert embraced them. Osborne had been built as a refuge from the rigidity of court life, and the children's presence ensured that refuge felt real. Even visitors noticed the difference immediately. Instead of the solemn quiet typical of royal residences, they were greeted by a home that radiated warmth and vitality. The royal family appeared not as formal rulers, but as a cohesive and affectionate unit. In Osborne's private spaces, hierarchy softened, titles faded, and family took precedence over formality. This approach to upbringing would influence generations of royal parenting, but its deepest legacy remained within the walls of Osborne itself. The house became a place where childhood felt protected yet free, and where the realities of royal duty coexisted with the everyday joys of family life. Osborne was not just a retreat, it was a living expression of Victoria and Albert's belief that love, presence, and shared experience were as essential to royalty as ceremony and tradition. In those rooms where children were allowed to run, laugh, and wander without restriction, Osborne became something profoundly rare in royal history, a home where the family's truest selves could exist without hesitation. Albert's influence on Osborne did not end at the walls of the house. In truth, the gardens and landscape were where his vision reached its fullest expression. If the architecture was his intellect made visible, the grounds were his heart laid across the earth. He saw the estate not as separate pieces, house, hill, shoreline, woodland, but as a unified composition where every path, terrace, and water feature worked together to create a sanctuary of order, beauty, and quiet introspection. And unlike the official royal estates where committees dictated every decision, Osborne gave him complete freedom to shape the landscape according to his own understanding of nature, geometry, and emotional harmony. He began with the terraces. Inspired by the villas of Italy and the cascading estates of the Mediterranean coast, Albert designed a series of structured levels that descended gently from the house toward the gardens below. The terraces acted like open-air rooms, spaces where the family could breathe in the sea air, enjoy the morning sun, or watch the horizon darken in the evenings. Their geometric precision was unmistakable. Clean lines, symmetrical railings, evenly spaced urns, and stone balustrades that framed the landscape like the borders of a painting. From these terraces, the house seemed to lean into the view, acknowledging the Solent as an essential part of its identity. At the heart of the lower gardens lay the parterres, meticulously arranged in patterns that reflected Albert's love for order and symbolism. These weren't simple flower beds. They were living diagrams of symmetry and balance. Each section had its own theme. Some formed intricate swirls reminiscent of Renaissance motifs, while others created bold geometric shapes that shifted with the seasons as different flowers bloomed. Albert personally reviewed the plans, choosing plants not only for color, but for texture, fragrance, and the emotional impression they created when viewed from the upper floors of the house. To him, a garden was a conversation between architecture and nature, a space where human design gently guided the wildness of the earth without suppressing it. The fountains added another layer of meaning to the estate. Water, to Albert, symbolized continuity and reflection. He believed that its presence softened the rigor of structured gardens, reminding visitors that nature always retained a fluid grace even within human boundaries. He positioned the fountains so that their sound reached the terraces above, creating a subtle, constant murmur that calmed the atmosphere. Pools mirrored the sky on clear days and captured the glow of lanterns during the summer months, turning evening walks into moments of quiet wonder. Albert's botanical choices were equally deliberate. He introduced rare plants collected from across Europe, selecting species that could adapt to the island's climate while still hinting at the exotic landscapes he admired. Some came from alpine regions, others from Mediterranean coasts, and a few from British woodlands. Together, they created a mosaic of colors and shapes that felt both curated and organic. He believed that gardens should offer discovery at every turn, unexpected blooms hiding in corners, climbing vines that softened the edges of stone structures, and tree-lined paths that invited exploration. Yet perhaps the most enchanting part of Albert's landscape design was the road leading to the private beach. This path was crafted not merely as a route to the shoreline, but as a transition from cultivated order to natural freedom. It curved gently through wooded areas, where filtered sunlight turned the leaves into shifting patterns on the ground. The air grew cooler as one approached the water, and the distant sound of waves slowly intensified, creating a sense of anticipation. Albert wanted the journey itself to feel like a slow unraveling of the everyday world, guiding the family from the structured gardens into the open embrace of Osborne Bay. At the beach, the house's presence softened into the background. Here the children played freely. Victoria found peace in the rhythmic movement of the tide, and Albert observed the merging of sea and sky with the contemplative calm that always seemed to settle over him when he was near water. The shoreline held its own significance, a personal realm where the royal family could exist without the weight of expectation, surrounded by nothing but the natural world. These gardens were more than ornamental spaces. They were reflections of Albert's inner life. Their geometry captured his discipline. Their terraces expressed his love for light and perspective. Their fountains revealed his need for balance, and the path to the beach spoke of his longing for simplicity and escape. Every plant, stone, and archway carried his touch, creating a landscape that felt alive with intention. In the end, the gardens became a living extension of the house's spirit. They embodied the same blend of refinement and intimacy, the same quiet longing for a life rooted in nature and family rather than ceremony. And long after Albert's time, the estate still carries the unmistakable imprint of his vision, the magic of a landscape shaped not by distant decree, but by a man who found in Osborne the freedom to create beauty for the people he loved most. One of the most remarkable features of Osborne was not a tower, a terrace, or a grand chamber. It was a small wooden cottage that looked as if it had arrived straight from the slopes of the Alps. The Swiss Cottage, as it came to be known, seemed almost whimsical compared to the structured geometry of the main house. Yet it held an importance that rivaled any room within the grand residence. It was built not for ceremony, but for education, not for guests, but for children, and it stood as one of the clearest expressions of Victoria and Albert's belief that their sons and daughters should grow up grounded, curious, and capable. The idea of the cottage began with Albert. During his travels, he had been deeply impressed by the simplicity and craftsmanship of Swiss alpine chalets, whose wooden structures and practical layouts embodied a kind of honest, hard-working life that he admired. He believed such environments taught valuable lessons: self-sufficiency, discipline, and the dignity of ordinary tasks. When the time came to create a special place for the royal children at Osborne, he wanted a structure that felt distinct from the elegance of the main house, something that would spark imagination while encouraging responsibility. To achieve this, he made an unusual decision. The cottage would be constructed in Switzerland, disassembled, transported piece by piece to the Isle of Wight, and rebuilt with absolute fidelity on the grounds of Osborne. The logistics were extraordinary. Craftsmen prepared each beam and panel, numbered them, and shipped them across Europe. When the pieces arrived, workmen reconstructed the cottage exactly as it had stood in its original location, an alpine structure reborn on English soil, intentionally rustic yet beautifully crafted. Once complete, the building bore no resemblance to a royal outbuilding. It looked like a miniature chalet, with carved wooden details, a steep roofline, and an inviting warmth that contrasted sharply with the formal grandeur of Osborne House. Inside, the cottage contained rooms that served a singular purpose: to educate through experience. One room held a fully functioning kitchen, equipped with utensils, small stoves, and the essentials needed for preparing simple meals. Another room acted as a workspace where the children learned practical skills: measuring, organizing, cleaning, and even basic household management. But the heart of the Swiss cottage experience lay outside, where Albert had laid out rectangular garden plots, one for each child. These small patches of earth became miniature kingdoms. The young princes and princesses tended with pride. They planted vegetables, fruits, and flowers, watered them daily, and monitored their progress with the kind of seriousness that only children can bring to such endeavors. Every harvest became an event. The children brought their produce to Albert, who purchased it from them with coins, using these moments to teach the principles of value, exchange, and honest work. It was economics taught not through lectures, but through soil and sunlight. Victoria watched the children's progress with joy. She admired the way the cottage encouraged them to break free from the artificial distance that royal upbringing often imposed. Here they could make mistakes, learn by doing, and feel the satisfaction of accomplishing something with their own hands. For her, the cottage symbolized a childhood she wished she had known, a childhood defined by warmth and discovery, rather than rigid protocols. Inside the kitchen, the children learned to prepare simple dishes, supervised by staff who understood that these lessons were more about confidence and independence than skill. The royal children chopped herbs, stirred soups, baked pastries, and cleaned up afterward. These tasks, ordinary in every other household, were extraordinary in a royal one. They taught humility, routine, and appreciation for the labor performed by others within the vast machinery of royal life. The cottage soon became the center of the children's world. It was where they experimented, played, learned, and grew. They held picnics on the lawn outside, traded vegetables between their plots, and invented elaborate stories inspired by the rustic charm of the building. Within those wooden walls, they were not princes and princesses. They were simply children. Even visitors to Osborne were astonished by this educational enclave. While other royal families kept their heirs meticulously separated from ordinary life, Victoria and Albert encouraged an upbringing shaped by curiosity and hands-on experience. The Swiss cottage stood as proof that they wanted their children to understand not only their privileges, but the realities of the world outside palace gates. In many ways, the cottage embodied the core philosophy of Osborne itself, a belief in balance. Just as the main house combined elegance with intimacy, the Swiss cottage combined play with discipline, imagination with practicality. It reminded the family, especially the children, that true character grows not only in grand halls, but also in small rooms filled with the scent of baked bread, in gardens where soil stains young hands, and in spaces where learning happens naturally, almost without notice. The Swiss cottage was more than a charming outbuilding. It was a testament to a royal couple's progressive vision of parenthood, a miniature kingdom where the children could cultivate not just crops, but the foundations of the people they would become. The private beach at Osborne was one of the most intimate corners of the entire estate, a place where the carefully composed architecture of the house gave way to the raw simplicity of wind, tide, and silence. Unlike the public beaches scattered around the Isle of Wight, this stretch of shoreline belonged entirely to the royal family. It offered the kind of seclusion Victoria cherished, a refuge where she could breathe without ceremony and walk along the water's edge without the constant awareness of observers. Here, under open skies, the formality of royal life dissolved into something almost ordinary. The path leading down to the beach was itself a transformation. It wound through stretches of woodland that muffled the sounds behind the family, then opened slowly into a clearing where the pale sand met the gentle sweep of Osborne Bay. The water was calm, protected from harsh winds by the natural curve of the coastline, and the view across the Solent had a serene, almost meditative quality. The beach never felt grand or theatrical. It felt personal, like a private chapter of the family's life, preserved on the edge of the island. But the most intriguing feature of this secluded world was the bathing machine, a structure that might seem quaint or even curious today, but was essential for a queen in the 19th century. Victorian customs demanded modesty, and public bathing, even in private spaces, was approached with strict propriety. To enjoy the sea without compromising dignity, Victoria relied on a specially designed mobile dressing cabin. It was unlike the simple bathing machines used elsewhere. Hers was carefully crafted, ornate, and fitted with unexpected luxuries. The bathing machine stood on sturdy wheels and was painted in soft tones that blended naturally with the beach environment. A small veranda extended from the front, framed by fabric curtains that protected the queen from view as she entered. Inside, the structure held a dressing room with enough space for her to change comfortably, along with a cleverly installed water closet, an unusual feature at the time, and one that revealed the thoughtfulness of Albert's design. The machine could be rolled directly into the shallow water, so that Victoria could step down a short ladder and enter the sea completely shielded from sight. When she wished to bathe, the process unfolded with a quiet choreography. Footmen helped prepare the machine, ensuring the curtains were properly arranged and that everything she needed was already inside. Once Victoria entered and closed the door behind her, the attendants would push the structure down the beach until the water reached the desired height. From the outside, only the silhouette of the machine could be seen against the waves. The queen herself remained hidden, able to enjoy the coolness of the sea in complete privacy. When she finished, the machine was pulled gently back onto the sand, allowing her to emerge once she was fully dressed again. To outsiders, this might have seemed like an elaborate ritual, but for Victoria, it was a rare moment of freedom. In the water, protected from the gaze of the world, she could move without constraint, feeling for a few minutes like an ordinary woman, rather than the figure upon whom an empire rested. The beach gave her a kind of peace that no palace corridor could ever offer, and she returned to it often, sometimes with her children, sometimes alone, always with a sense of quiet relief. The area surrounding the beach reflected this sense of privacy. Benches were placed discreetly under trees, offering shaded spots where Victoria could pause before or after bathing. Albert often walked the shoreline with her, or with the children, enjoying the simplicity of the landscape and the sound of waves breaking gently against the shore. For the family, the beach became a ritual space, a place where summer days unfolded slowly, filled with conversations, laughter, and moments that could never exist within the confines of court life. Even today, the remnants of the bathing area allow visitors to imagine the quiet rituals that once took place there. The shoreline, unchanged in its natural beauty, still carries the echo of footsteps, the rumble of the bathing machine rolling into the surf, and the soft rhythms of the sea that accompanied one of the most personal aspects of life at Osborne. Here, on a hidden strip of sand, the royal family found a sanctuary beyond architecture, a place where the constraints of royalty washed away with the tide, leaving only the simple pleasure of water, horizon, and freedom. As the years passed and the family's life at Osborne deepened, the house itself began to evolve in ways that reflected not only the changing needs of Victoria and Albert, but also the expanding horizons of the British Empire. Osborne had started as a private retreat, a Mediterranean dream translated into English stone, but it soon became clear that the original structure, even with its towers and terraces, could no longer contain the full expression of the royal couple's ambitions. The answer was expansion, and the expansions that followed transformed Osborne from a beautiful villa into a sprawling royal haven, with layers of cultural influence woven into its architecture. The first major addition was the pavilion wing, which extended the main residence and redefined the internal flow of the house. The pavilion was conceived as a place where the principal and royal apartments could grow in comfort and versatility. Its design maintained the Italianate style of the main structure, but with a slightly more formal arrangement of rooms. Inside, Victoria's mother was given her own suite, a gesture that showed the family's dedication to keeping loved ones physically close, even within a residence built for privacy. The pavilion offered more space for gatherings, conversations, and intimate family affairs that didn't belong in the ceremonial heart of the house. Yet, as significant as the pavilion was, it was the later expansion that truly marked Osborne's transformation into a multicultural expression of empire, the construction of the Durbar Wing. Built between 1890 and 1891 under the direction of John Lockwood Kipling, father of the celebrated writer Rudyard Kipling, this wing introduced a new artistic voice to the estate. Where Albert had filled Osborne with Mediterranean elegance, the Durbar Wing brought India into the architectural conversation. The jewel of this addition was the Durbar Room, a space so intricate and so visually rich that it felt like stepping into another world entirely. The name itself came from the Hindi word Durbar, meaning court, evoking both ceremony and cultural exchange. But it was the craftsmanship of the room that truly astonished visitors. Decorated by Bhai Ram Singh, one of the leading Indian designers of the time, the Durbar Room showcased ornate patterns, carved panels, and delicate reliefs that reflected the artistic traditions of the subcontinent. Each surface seemed alive with detail, telling stories from a land thousands of miles away, but deeply connected to Victoria's identity as Empress of India. The ceiling glowed with hues and patterns inspired by Indian palaces, and the walls were adorned with carvings that intertwined botanical motifs with geometric harmony. Intricate friezes framed doorways, and polished surfaces created reflections that gave the room an almost otherworldly radiance. This was not merely a decorative experiment. It was a statement of cultural respect and imperial pride, an acknowledgement of the vast and diverse territories under the British Crown. The Durbar Room also became the home of many of the gifts the Queen received during her golden and diamond jubilees. Silver and copper vases engraved with extraordinary detail, ceremonial armor, and models of Indian palaces found their place here, transforming the room into a silent gallery of global connection. These objects had been sent by Indian princes and dignitaries, each one carrying its own lineage, symbolism, and story. Within the context of the Durbar Room, they formed a tapestry of relationships woven across continents. Above this magnificent chamber, the first floor of the new wing was dedicated entirely to Princess Beatrice, Victoria's youngest daughter, who lived with and cared for her mother for many years. Her suite was designed with comfort and dignity in mind, bridging the grandeur of the Durbar Room below with the intimacy of the private apartments above. This blending of personal and political, domestic and ceremonial, reflected Osborne's evolving identity, a place where the boundaries of family life and state representation continually overlapped in quiet but meaningful ways. The expansions also influenced the surrounding estate. Gardens were reimagined to harmonize with the new wings, and pathways were altered to create smoother transitions between the various sections of the house. The once compact villa now stretched across the landscape like a growing story, each chapter adding new dimensions to the family's life and the broader narrative of the empire. What emerged from these expansions was a residence that embodied more than architecture. Osborne became a living map of influences: Italian Renaissance foundations, Swiss childhood excursions, and Indian artistry layered into a British royal retreat. Every new wing reflected a new era, a new cultural dialogue, or a new need within the family. The house's evolution mirrored the empire's own shifting identity, expanding outward while remaining rooted in the intimate world that Victoria and Albert had created. By the time the final stones were set into place, Osborne House had transcended its origin as a simple escape from court life. It had grown into a mosaic of ideas, values, and global connections, each addition enriching the story of a family and an empire woven inseparably into the walls of their private sanctuary. As Osborne expanded in size and character, it also expanded in purpose. What had begun as a private refuge and architectural experiment slowly became a stage where an entirely new era unfolded. The 19th century was a time of rapid invention, brilliant minds, and technological leaps that reshaped daily life. And Osborne, secluded though it was, found itself at the very center of these transformations. The house became not just a retreat, but a quiet witness to the dawn of modernity. Victoria and Albert had always shown a deep interest in innovation. Albert, especially, viewed technological progress not as a novelty, but as a force that could strengthen society, improve communication, and elevate the quality of everyday life. So, when scientists, engineers, and thinkers began looking for places to demonstrate their new inventions, Osborne became a welcoming environment, far removed from the formal pressures of London, yet equipped with the intellectual curiosity needed to appreciate such demonstrations fully. It was under this spirit that one of the most extraordinary technological moments in British history took place inside the walls of the house. On a cold January day in 1878, Alexander Graham Bell arrived at Osborne carrying a device that promised to change the way the world communicated. His invention, the telephone, was still unfamiliar to most people, and the idea of carrying voices across wires seemed almost magical. Victoria, however, was intrigued. Her openness to progress made her home the site of the first publicly witnessed long-distance telephone calls in Britain. The demonstration unfolded in a room filled with anticipation. Bell arranged his equipment carefully, connecting wires with a practiced calm. On the other end, across the Solent and Cowes, sat a matching unit. Additional connections extended onward to Southampton and eventually London. When the moment came, and Victoria lifted the receiver to her ear, her reaction was a mixture of astonishment and delight. The voice that traveled through the line was faint but unmistakably human, a sign that distance was no longer a barrier to communication. She described the experience as quite extraordinary, a phrase that captured the sense of wonder rippling through the room. The Queen immediately understood the potential of the invention, so much so that she asked to purchase the equipment used during the demonstration. Bell, honored by her interest, offered to create a special set of telephones just for her. In that single moment, Osborne became a bridge between centuries, a place where the traditions of monarchy and the promise of the future met in the sound of a faint human voice echoing through wires. But Bell was not the only innovator to pass through Osborne. The estate attracted scientists, artists, and thinkers who found in the house a place of calm conducive to invention. Discussions about engineering, photography, communication, and design took place in rooms that had once been meant for quiet family use. The drawing room, the pavilion, Albert's study, each space became a temporary forum where ideas took root. Visitors brought new perspectives from across Europe and beyond, and the royal family engaged with them not as distant rulers, but as active participants in the evolving world of modern thought. Photography, still a developing art, also found a home at Osborne. Victoria and Albert allowed painters and photographers to capture informal moments of family life, something no royal household had ever done so freely. Thousands of prints circulated across Britain, presenting the monarchy not as a distant institution, but as a relatable family. This simple decision reshaped public perception and became another quiet revolution that began at Osborne. Even within its private rooms, technological progress subtly reshaped daily routines. New forms of lighting were tested, tools and domestic improvements were introduced, and the house gradually adapted to the practical realities of an evolving world. Albert's earlier passion for efficient design found echoes in every new device, every modern improvement that entered the estate. The atmosphere of curiosity that he had instilled early in Osborne's history continued long after his time. By the late 19th century, Osborne had transformed from a secluded retreat into a home where past, present, and future coexisted. Its Italian-inspired façade and serene gardens whispered of the Renaissance. Its Swiss cottage taught children the values of work and independence. And now, its rooms echoed with the quiet hum of innovation. The telephone demonstration in particular signaled a shift not only in technology, but in the very concept of connection, showing that voices could travel across miles. That distance could be bridged with a simple device, and that the world was on the edge of a new era. In this way, Osborne became more than a royal residence. It became a witness to change, a place where the traditions of monarchy touched the exciting, unpredictable momentum of modern invention. And within its walls, the future quietly announced itself through the soft crackle of Belle's early telephone, forever linking the private sanctuary of Victoria and Albert with the vast technological transformation that was reshaping the world beyond the Solent. In the later years of Victoria's life, Osborne became more than a retreat. It became a sanctuary woven from memories, routines, and a longing for the stability she had once shared with Albert. After his passing, the house changed in ways that were both subtle and profound. Spaces that had once echoed with the rhythm of a young and lively family now carried a quieter atmosphere, as though the building itself recognized the absence of the man whose vision had shaped it. The gardens still bloomed, the towers still caught the afternoon sun, but the energy of the estate shifted into something gentler, more contemplative. For Victoria, Osborne offered healing. It was the only place where she felt she could step away from the imposing weight of monarchy and exist not as a sovereign, but as a woman navigating loss and responsibility. She returned here again and again, drawn not by ceremony, but by the comfort of familiarity. The rooms Albert had designed, his study, the private sitting room, the terraces that overlooked the Solent, became spaces she revisited with a mixture of solace and remembrance. Every corner of the house carried traces of their shared life, and she found strength in those memories. Albert's study was the first room to quietly transform. After he was gone, Victoria preserved it exactly as he had left it, turning it into a memorial without ever formally declaring it one. His books remained in place, his writing implements arranged neatly on the desk, and the items he had touched or moved were never disturbed. Entering the room felt like stepping into a frozen moment, a space suspended in time where his presence lingered in the arrangement of objects and the calm order he had always sought. It was a room she visited often, not with sorrow, but with gratitude for the years they had shared. Her own bedroom also took on new significance. Once a space of partnership and nightly conversation, it became a place of reflection. The soft colors and delicate furnishings that had once symbolized intimacy now embodied resilience. The room still faced the shoreline, where she and Albert had walked, and each sunrise over the Solent brought a quiet reassurance that life continued, even if altered. Servants often spoke of the serenity that settled over the Queen whenever she spent time in her room at Osborne, as if the house itself wrapped her in a kind of emotional warmth she found nowhere else. As her family grew, the house adjusted around her. Yaitina's children and grandchildren visited frequently, filling the halls with a life that softened the stillness of the estate. They understood that Osborne was not merely a residence for Victoria. It was a refuge built from the very foundations of her happiness with Albert. Even state affairs, which she could never entirely escape, felt less burdensome here. She conducted audiences in the rooms he had helped design, finding comfort in the continuity between past and present. It was in this environment, calm, familiar, and deeply personal, that Victoria spent her final days. Osborne had witnessed her joys, her struggles, her transformation from young queen to emblem of an entire era. It held the memories of her children's laughter, the traces of Albert's architecture, and the echoes of countless walks along the beach that had once restored her spirit. When her health began to decline, she chose to remain here, surrounded by the very spaces that had shaped her private life. The end came quietly, with members of her family gathered around her. Osborne, which had been her first true home after marriage and the birthplace of so much happiness, became the place where her long story gently closed. After her departure, the house seemed to exhale into silence. The rooms were left as they were, some preserved as memorials, others simply holding the ambiance of the life that had unfolded within their walls. Her private bedroom became a deeply respected space, preserved exactly as it had been during her final days. It was not staged as a shrine, but kept intact as a testament to the woman who had shaped so much of modern Britain. The pavilion wing, where many of the family's most intimate moments had occurred, remained untouched for years, its atmosphere unchanged as if waiting for footsteps that would never return. Osborne stood in this stillness like a guardian of memory. The Belvedere towers continued to rise above the estate, looking out across the Solent that had comforted Victoria so often. The gardens Albert had designed grew on, renewing themselves each season just as they had in the early days of their marriage. The entire estate became a quiet monument, not to monarchy, but to partnership, family, and the private life of a woman who had lived more publicly than almost anyone else of her time. And so, Osborne remained, holding both the joy of its beginnings and the calm of its final years. A house defined not just by architecture or history, but by the enduring emotional imprint of the queen who loved it most. After Victoria's passing, Osborne entered a new chapter that neither she nor Albert could have fully anticipated. The house, once alive with the rhythms of family life and the quiet rituals of their private world, became a residence suspended between intimacy and national significance. Its future no longer revolved around the royal family's needs, but around the legacy it represented, one shaped by personal devotion, architectural boldness, and the emotional history of an era. Edward VII, though respectful of his mother's attachment to Osborne, did not share her deep bond with the property. To him, it felt inseparable from Victoria's presence, beautiful, dignified, but too private and too personal to serve as an active royal residence. The house was a museum of their parents' life, complete with rooms preserved in a kind of emotional stillness. Rather than attempt to repurpose it or alter its character, Edward made a decision that would change Osborne's destiny. He presented the estate to the nation on the day of his coronation. This gesture transformed Osborne from a private sanctuary into a public treasure, though not all parts of the house opened immediately. The royal apartments on the upper floors, including Victoria's bedroom and sitting rooms, were sealed off and maintained as a private memorial for the family. These spaces remained untouched, held in quiet respect, accessible only to royal descendants who wished to step into the rooms where Victoria had lived her last years. For decades, they stood preserved like pages in a book that could not yet be read by the public. Other sections of the estate found new purpose. Part of the grounds was converted into the Royal Naval College, Osborne, a training facility for young cadets preparing for military service. The stable block became a place of discipline, education, and future leadership, echoing in a distant way the values Albert had instilled in his own children. From 1903 until 1921, boys as young as 13 lived and studied here, surrounded by the same gardens and terraces that had once shaped the royal family's life. Another wing of the house became a convalescent home for officers, offering quiet recovery in rooms designed for comfort. Soldiers returning from conflict found solace in the peaceful corners of Osborne, their presence bridging the estate's transition from royal retreat to place of national service. Through these new functions, the estate began to weave itself into the broader story of Britain, not through grandeur, but through care and continuity. Over time, the question of public access returned. By the mid-20th century, the nation's relationship with history had changed. There was growing interest in understanding the private lives of public figures, especially one as iconic as Victoria. In 1954, Queen Elizabeth II approved the opening of the first-floor private apartments to visitors for the first time. These rooms, once preserved in silence, became windows into a world previously hidden from view. The modest study where Albert had worked, the bedroom where Victoria spent her final days, the sitting room filled with the quiet echoes of family life. Visitors were struck not just by the history, but by the humanity of those spaces. As decades passed, efforts to protect and interpret Osborne deepened. In 1986, the estate came under the care of English Heritage, marking a defining moment in its transformation. With this stewardship came restoration, research, and a commitment to presenting the house not as a relic, but as a living narrative. English Heritage opened additional areas to the public, including the second floor, and undertook the delicate task of preserving everything from furniture and artwork to garden layouts and architectural details. Their work ensured that Osborne would remain accessible, understood, and protected for generations. Under their care, the estate became an immersive museum where visitors could walk through Victoria's world, admire the grand drawing room, explore the Durbar Room's breathtaking Indian craftsmanship, stand in the Swiss Cottage where royal children learned practical skills, and stroll the path to the private beach where the family found peace. Each visit became less about observing history and more about entering a story that still felt alive. Through this careful preservation and public opening, Osborne gradually shifted from a private refuge to a symbol of national memory. It showcased not only the life of a queen, but the evolution of a family, an empire, and a country moving into the modern age. The estate's blend of personal intimacy and historical significance created a rare kind of connection, one where visitors could see not just the public monarch, but the private woman behind the crown. Today, Osborne stands as one of the most evocative heritage sites in Britain. It remains a place where architecture, emotion, innovation, and family history intertwine. The Belvedere towers still rise above the Solent, the gardens still echo Albert's meticulous vision, and the rooms still carry the quiet presence of lives deeply lived. What began as a secluded haven for two young royals has become a national inheritance, an enduring reminder of the moments, choices, and dreams that shaped not only a home, but an entire era.